So first of all, let's start out with the crash. Now, this is sensitive. So if you are sensitive, if you are super sensitive about this, if you have some sort of phobia of flying, or this is a phobia for you, I understand, and maybe you want to cut out here. And once again, I have, nothing doing this from an analysis standpoint, from a liability standpoint, and also from, a point of deep consideration for the lives lost and the people that lost loved ones, family members, in that crash. As of date, as of now, all but 2 people appear to have been killed on that flight. It appears that there were only 2 survivors at this point. That's the evidence I had as of 5 minutes ago, that only 2 people had survived, and they had what is described between moderate to severe injuries. All right. So we'll get into it. All right. So let's jump into the flight here. So the flight was a flight on Jeju Air. Now, anybody knows, first of all, Jeju, for those who don't know anything about Korea, let me explain what Jeju is. Jeju is an island. It's this island down here. You might be able to see it. Let me try to focus over here. You might be able to see it kind of the south here. It's kind of Korea's Hawaii. That's how I like to describe it. It's got a big volcano in the middle. It's the most flown route from Jeju Island to Seoul. Is one of the most flown routes in the world, right? In terms of volume, right? Between those 2 places, right? And the airport is wildly over capacity. That airport is like super overbooked, right? Because it never intended to have the amount of traffic. So they're actually thinking about building a second one, but there's some holdups for environmental concerns to build a second airport on the island, right? Because they just need more capacity. So this was not a flight to Jeju, though. I mean, the airline is Jeju Air after the island, right? This is a flight between Bangkok Savannapool Airport, and yes, that's how you pronounce. It's not Savarnabhumi, right? For those that might think so. As I like to say, not Savarnabhumi. Bangkok's new international airport. There's 2. BKK is the new airport, and DMK. Dunmuang is the old airport, which actually I went into last night, and actually the immigration was quite quick at DMK, but it's a little bit dated at that old airport. So the flight was from Bangkok. It left at 1 a.m. and arrived at 8:30 a.m. These are often the type of flights that I take. So I often will take these flights leaving late out of Bangkok and arriving in the morning in Korea, because what I'll do is I'll try to sleep a little bit on the plane, and then when I get there, I'll just crash for another couple hours, and that'll be my sleep. So that's a route that, once again, I've taken these flights before, and I've been on Jeju Air so many times. It's kind of like I want to say the Spirit Airlines, but maybe that's not fair. It might be the Southwest. It's sort of the low-cost carrier of Korea, right? It's one of the low-cost carriers. Now, low-cost carriers are more profitable than mainline carriers, kind of legacy carriers, but they don't have massive margins. And that's going to be relevant when we talk about the consequences of this. That's going to be relevant when it comes to what's going to happen coming out of this, right? So the flight was supposed to land at 8:30 a.m. Obviously, you see here it says canceled. Canceled is a polite word for crashed, really. Crash. Yeah, someone said Frontier. I think Frontier is also a good comparison as well. Okay, so here's what happened. I'm going to play the video, and we're going to talk about what allegedly happened here based on the preliminary reports. So this is the crash video. Once again, if you're super sensitive, you can look away and look back in 30 seconds, and it'll be over. Okay, so real quick, this is the crash video. There's not really, it's not live audio, it's the news audio, but I'll keep the audio in there. Yeah, the audio's on. I'll keep the audio in there. Let's go. Well, you see the news, but you can kind of hear that. You can hear the jet engines. So until the airplane impacted, it was actually in one piece. So if this actually was either what a longer runway, or if it had what's called EMAS, which we're going to talk about in a second, right, which I have a little bit of knowledge of because I worked as an attorney for the Broward County Airport, and we had an EMAS system at the end of the runway, right? It would have kind of sunk into the end of the runway, but what it did was it went off the runway and then it hit a instrument landing system, so some antennas at the end, and that's what caused the explosion. This is no landing gear, so you can see here very clearly right here, it's a belly landing. This is a no landing gear landing, right? And it is possible to land a plane like that. It is possible, but it's super high risk. So the alleged, according to the news and according to what we've heard so far in the preliminary reports, they have used the term bird strike combined with bad weather as the reason for the landing gear malfunction. Now, that's the part where, look, I see people getting into threads on Twitter saying, well, how does birds affect the landing gear, et cetera, et cetera. That's something we're going to get an investigation on. I think at this point, trying to, drop conclusive evidence within 12 hours, 24 hours of a crash is not going to happen. That's not how these investigations happen. There will be a very serious investigation into this because particularly Korea, which has a crazy history of airplane accidents and other issues, and we're going to talk about that, is going to look in this very seriously because this is not just going to hurt Jeju Air. This will hurt all Korean airlines. This will hurt the reputation of Korean airlines as a whole, as a countrywide. So obviously there's going to be some looking into safety issues, in general, particularly at Jeju Air, but I think all the airlines in Korea will reassess their safety at this point. That's just how things go. So we're going to get more proof on that. And it's not for me to do the air, once again, I'm not an engineer, I'm not to speculate on that, but I do want to talk about kind of what happens afterwards, first of all, legally, and what's going to happen in terms of the investigation, because obviously this is an international thing, right? So, okay, who's going to look into this? Well, obviously, it's a Korean airline landed in Korea. So Korea's folks that are over airline safety, et cetera, are going to look into that, right? Now, there were 2 Thai nationals on that plane. So you can imagine that perhaps there might be some, information sharing between, Thailand and Korea, right? So obviously there might be some cooperation there, some collaboration there. But the primary investigative body would be Korea, and presuming that since most of the nationals on this plane were Korean, right, most of the damages will be within Korea. So this isn't something that's going to deal with a lot of parties that are from a million different countries. It's going to primarily be something that is contained within lawsuits, et cetera, that might be in Korea, right? Now, is the NTS, somebody in the chat says the NTSB and Boeing. Of course, Boeing is going to have to get involved here. Boeing has, and this is something that many people have pointed out, a abysmal record over the past couple of years, and that's to say the least. And we can talk all about Boeing's corporate structure and what led to that, and that's perhaps a separate episode to just deep dive on Boeing and the BS inside of Boeing and all that sort of stuff. That's a beyond thing, but of course Boeing is going to be at that table because of the airframes, right? And we have to decide whether there's an issue with the airframe itself and whether there could be a grounding of an airframe. If you guys can recall, whenever there are issues that appear to be with a class of plane, they'll just ground the whole class. They'll just say, yeah, we're just grounding all of these planes until you fix the problem. And, whether or not that happens We'll see. Obviously, when that does happen, though, that is a massive disruption. And to do that at holiday season and what is peak season for travel here would be pretty crazy right now. Still could happen. I'm not saying wouldn't happen, but it would be pretty crazy with flight issues for that. Now, to be clear, Jeju Air has not been deceptive. If you look at what they've done, and this is once again very, very Korean, as well. This is the CEO and the executives of Jeju Air bowing and apologizing and saying they take full responsibility, right? So I know this may be weird for Westerners, but this is something that does happen, right? Where they say, nope, this is our responsibility. We take full responsibility for this, right? So that's them over here. Nice shot of the CEO and everybody else apologizing publicly for what happened, right? In a sincere fashion. This is not well, at least appearing sincere. See, their appearance of sincerity is 100x more than Johnny Somali. Whether or not you believe they're sincere is up to you, but they do it better than Johnny. That's all. Or Ramsey. I'm sorry, Ramsey. All right. So I'll show some photos here and then just talk about it real quick. So apparently the survivors were from the tail section. So they're actually flight attendants that were in the tail. It's grisly here, but I'm sure you can see why only the tail people survived, right? Because everything else was not looking good, not looking good at all. In fact, I think this photo here is a rescue or it's a removal of some folks in there, but also this is where they got the folks that survived. We're like back up in there, back up in the tail. So yeah, everything else just in bits, smashed, blown up, just absolutely not in a state. So those were the survivors that were in severe to moderate condition. And I want to talk about another airline, actually a Korean airline, actually the Korean airline that for years, and I'm saying years. So this is an article in 1999. 1999 from the Wall Street Journal. Korean Air tries to fix a dismal safety record. So Korean Air, which nowadays has rehabilitated their image in the early 2000s, they kind of rehabilitated their image. Korean Air had a horrible safety record, for both things that were issues with their pilots, and miscommunications, which we'll talk about. But also they had a crazy one here. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but if you guys don't know the story of Korean Air flight 007, this was back during the Cold War, where the pilot of the Korean Air was shot down by an Su-15 over Russian airspace, right? So they were supposed to have a flight path. This is back in the old USSR days. Those that remember the USSR, shout out to you guys. There was supposed to be a flight from Anchorage to Anchorage over to Asia, and they were supposed to go over a route which stayed clear of Russian airspace. So this is Katmanchka, which if you ever played Risk, you know that you have to invade America through Kamchatka. You have to invade America through Kamchatka. That's, if you played Risk, you know this. It's a basic fact. So they had some prohibited airspace here. You have the Kuril Islands, which were at one point, Japanese, a little bit of feuding over that between Russia and Japan, but are taken care of by Russia nowadays. So they flew over this prohibited airspace, and a Russian fighter jet went up, took a look, and launched a missile and destroyed the Korean airliner, with everybody who was on, including a congressman that died on that flight. So that's 007. And then the other really, really bad one, and this is real bad, which killed almost everybody, not everybody, there were like 20 survivors, was Flight 801. And this one is very famous because this one was because of a hierarchy issue. Because the Korean hierarchy is super serious. This is a crazy one. So this one actually was a flight that crashed into Bajia Peak, south of Nimitz Hill in Guam, and they killed 229 of the 254. Now the issue was that there was a big issue of seniority. So in Korea, like, number one, the oldest and also like the captain has a massive amount of hierarchy. And in that kind of systematic, in that sort of basic hierarchy, it's you don't question the senior pilot when he's like, yeah, this is what we're doing, everything's okay, and you're the co-pilot, you're the engineer, right, you're the first officer or whatever, and you're saying, hey, that's fucked up, and the pilot's like, don't worry about it. You don't have the really ability to challenge that or override that or whatever else. And they've changed that. Korea, this happened in 1984. They changed their culture. They actually changed the language they can like use in the cockpit because of this, right? This is a really interesting one. And if you listen to a breakdown, we're not going to do it today, but there's very interesting breakdowns of the Korean language they're using and how it's formal, and how if you listen to it in English and subtitled, you wouldn't get how it's very subtle. The engineer and the first officer try to challenge the pilot, but the pilot ignores them or brushes them off or like doesn't pay attention, right? And that's how that accident happened. So it took decades for them to recover from that. Although Korean Air did recover, and at this point, they're still, one of the biggest airlines in all of Korea, which I fly all the time. I fly Korean Air all the time, despite the fact that they got, a airliner shot down by a Soviet jet, and they had a serious crash in Guam in '84, which, to be fair, is 2 years before I was born anyways. So, maybe they've had some time to patch things up.